Hello, bonjour. My name is Andrew Ross. I'm the Director of Research Support and Regional Services here at Library and Archives Canada. J'aimerais tout d'abord reconnaître respectueusement que nous sommes rassemblés sur les terres et bordés par les eaux ancestrales de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe. Depuis la nuit des temps, le peuple Anishinaabe habite et prend soin de ces terres sur lesquelles nous vivons, travaillons et nous divertissons. Nous honorons le lien sacré unissant depuis si longtemps ce peuple à ce territoire qui demeure non cédé. Library and Archives Canada understands that without truth, there can be no reconciliation. That is why we are committed to giving voice to and sharing the stories of those whom history has silenced. Library and Archives Canada is a national repository for stories, some of which are written in books, and others waiting to be revealed through careful research in archival documents. We're committed to protecting these stories so that future generations of Canadians can see, hear, and learn these stories for themselves. Tonight, LAC is proud to partner with the Ottawa International Writers Festival for the book launch of We Breed Lions, Confronting Canada's Troubled Hockey Culture by Rick Westhead. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's moderator. Stephen Keys is an anchor at CTV News, where you can see him during CTV News at 5 and CTV News at 11:30 p.m. He also reports live, local, and breaking news for CTV News at 6. Stephen also gives a lot of his time back to the community, volunteering for several not-for-profit groups with a focus on minority issues, youth, and the arts. So I'll now hand it over to Stephen for a stimulating conversation with our author. Merci à tous et à toutes, et bonne soirée.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? Excellent. Please welcome Rick Westhead to the stage. First and foremost, Rick, I want to thank you for the investigative piece that you've done on behalf of the nation, because lifting the veil on this issue, something that hasn't been talked about in a long time or so broadly and so specifically to hockey culture, is very important. Potentially life-saving, potentially life-altering solutions can come from your investigation. So I want to thank you on behalf of the nation for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's start with discussing the title of your book, because it is beautifully thought-provoking. The idea of a lion, a majestic animal, the king of the jungle, but also an animal that we understand to be a predator, a hunter in ways. So maybe talk to us about how you came up with that title, We Breed Lions.
So in early 2024, and the story goes back before that, Canadians learned about the allegations in this case in London, Ontario in May 2022. And fast forward 2 years, the London police had opened an investigation. There was far more scrutiny on Hockey Canada. Canadians had learned a lot about how that association was being run and some of the things that they were doing that did not line up with Canadian values, like maintaining a secret slush fund. But in early 2024, I decided to write this book. And I knew that, because I thought it was in the public interest, I thought these were stories that the Canadian public needed to hear. And I knew that the reflex from people in hockey would be, things used to be bad. Back when Sheldon Kennedy came out with his story in the 1990s, there were real issues then, but things are better today. And to some degree, things are better, but there are still issues. There are still systemic problems in hockey in Canada, starting as early as in minor hockey, which has become so commercialized and become such a major industry. Yeah. This part of our country where moms and dads used to tie up their kids' skates in rooms, and it was one of the most beautiful parts of hockey, and that heart has really become corrupted by, pay-for-play junior leagues, by teams being bought and sold that are not for profits. And then we see that extend through the junior leagues, where teenage boys, 14, 15, 16, are moving away from their family homes. So to try to understand where we are today, I leaned into the knowledge my two boys have of how to use Instagram and asked them to help me message players. So we went through draft lists of players in the last 10 years who've been drafted into the Canadian Hockey League. And so for people who don't follow the minutiae of hockey, the Canadian Hockey League is an umbrella league that it works in concert with the Ontario Hockey League, so your Ottawa 67s here, the Western Hockey League in the West, and the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League now. So we looked at the players who've been drafted over the last 10 years, and we tried to figure out which ones have Instagram accounts. So if your name was John Smith, I'd sort of like forget it, it's going to be too hard.
Yeah.
But if you had a unique name like Rick Westhead, I'd look, and often you'd see somebody, if you know he was a junior hockey player, if it was Rick Westhead 93 or something, their jersey number would often be in their handle. So I sent over 200 players a message that said something like, you know, I'm working on this book. I'd love to talk to you about your experiences in the game, especially the experiences off the ice. And of those messages, I got about 100 or so responses from, you know, players saying, well, tell me more, I want to know about this. And I wound up doing 58 interviews with players. And it's important to point out, this is only players who played in major junior hockey or Tier 2 junior, which is just one level below, in the last 10 years, effectively. So these stories that they would tell me are current, they're contemporary, they are not historical. And one of the players just put it so well. He was a man, I think he was one of the older guys I talked to, he was 30. And he described being a junior hockey player, and I'm paraphrasing, as somebody who moves away from their family home, and they instantly become the alpha male in a new small Canadian community where they live. They can get into any bar underage, they can talk with ease to any girl they want to, they can skip school whenever they want. They learn the rules of the jungle in the locker room. Rookies always eat last after a game or a practice. Rookies shower last. If the players have access to a car, rookies know they're always in the back seat. You learn, and this is him speaking, you learn that you will do anything for your teammates because they're your brothers. You will lie for them if you have to. Civilians wouldn't understand it. I thought that was such an interesting choice of words. Civilians wouldn't understand it. He said, you know, we look around the room and we see 24 clones of ourselves, and we know we are better than everyone else because we're junior hockey players. And in our culture, we breed lions. And how do you tell a lion to stop being a lion? And in all the subsequent interviews I did with junior players after that, I read them that full quote. And not one said, no, that doesn't make any sense. Every one of the players I talked to were like, there's truth in that, absolutely.
Was it surprising to you that so many could identify with players going through this or feeling as though they have this predator within them?
What was most surprising was how many young men wanted to talk about this. You know, and I've worked all I've ever done is journalism. It's all I've ever wanted to do. And I can tell you the number of people I would talk to in my business, you know, and I'd talk to them about a story like this, and they'd say, they're not going to talk about this. And they're defeated even before they go to their first person, right? And I talked to 58 players, and most of those young men are on the record. And again, for people who aren't in journalism closely, this means they gave me their permission to put their names next to their stories. And the power that gives this book, in my opinion, is significant because you could say, well, Rick Westhead doesn't like hockey. He wants to bring down the sport.
Right.
This is not my story. These stories are there, and their names are next to them, right? Sheldon Kennedy, who has become, in my opinion, a hero in Canada for coming out with his story of being abused by his coach in junior. Don't believe me, believe Sheldon. Sheldon's working in this world right now and still believes that we're barely scraping the surface, that there are still such serious systemic problems in the game. And it's really hard for me because I love hockey.
Yeah.
I play twice a week in Toronto at Ted Reeve Arena. I play on the weekends at George Bell, another rink in Toronto. My best friends in the world I've made through hockey. One of my sons was diagnosed with cancer during the pandemic. And during his battle with cancer at Sick Kids, when my family's lives were turned upside down and the floor was pulled out from underneath us, it was our hockey community that rallied around us and held us up, dropping off meals, you know, doing all kinds of amazing things to help us. And, you know, I think my takeaway from this is that two things can be true. You can have a sport that is a beautiful sport. It's an amazing sport to play. It's an amazing sport to watch. But you can also have a sport that has systemic issues that have to be confronted. Because for the last century, the stories that we've been told and that we tell in Canada about hockey are exclusively the stories about how this sport brings us together as a country, is part of our social fabric. We're really good at it as Canadians, and we should be proud of that. And all that's true. But we should also have the courage to hold this hockey game to account and to hold the people who have power in this game accountable.
I don't want to ignore what you just shared with us. How's your son doing?
Yeah, he's great. Carter is first year at University of Guelph and living his best life right now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Happy to hear that.
Yeah, thanks.
It's not only believe Sheldon Kennedy, but that coach pled guilty in that case. It's also believe Graham James as well, right? So when you have someone who's accused of something and then they admit to it, there's no doubt there. But, you know, someone has described your book as being the moment of reckoning in hockey culture in Canada. Some people would have thought that that story that came forward in the 90s would have been that moment of reckoning. What do you say to that?
It was. And when Sheldon Kennedy came out with his story of abuse, the federal government, provincial governments, Ontario provincial and federal hockey associations, everyone threw their hands up and said, never again. We have to make sure that we protect our children, that we make this game as safe as it can be. But we all know how life works, right? It's busy. We're all busy. Media, if there's one thing we're guilty of, it's chasing the shiny object. And it's only, you know, a couple weeks before we're on to the next story and looking at the next thing, and all those promises of reform are forgotten either purposefully, because it's going to cost money to follow through on them, or it just through happenstance. So we have been here before, right? And the case of Sheldon Kennedy is not the only one. And I think kind of I covered this trial in London, Ontario this year with these five young men who were accused of sexual assault. And it has to be said, they were found not guilty, they were acquitted. And not only that, the judge in the case determined that there was consent in her opinion in what happened.
Right.
And we respect the verdicts of our courts, of course.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that case got so much attention internationally, but it wasn't the only case. In the last couple years alone, like since I started reporting on this, I also reported on a story in Quebec City about two former junior players named Massimo Siciliano and Nicholas Degg from Victoriaville. And they were accused of sexually assaulting a young woman in their hotel room following a team championship. And those players pleaded guilty on the eve of their trial.
Wow.
Then there was another case of Noah Corson, whose father starred in the NHL, who was convicted of sexual assault, and two of his teammates who pleaded guilty in youth court. Then there was another case of a former Ottawa Senators junior prospect who was convicted of sexual assault. I think his name is Gabriel Gagne. And we haven't even talked about the minor hockey cases. I could do a story on minor hockey and alleged abuses every day until I retire. There's stories about sexualized based hazing that have received national attention. It doesn't end. So there are many, many cases that I think support the argument that there were real systemic issues here.
Let's go back to 2022, when you first broke the story. You're flooded in your inbox on social media with people reacting and responding to it. I think when I first learned of it, I was even surprised. It's like, TSN is doing this investigation? Because you think of TSN and sports being at the surface, but there's such a culture, there's such a human aspect, a connection between one another, and sports uniting the country, and hockey in particular, that it has to be addressed. But how did you become wise to this story? And what was the initial response from people who love this game to this degree?
Good question. You know, my reporting on issues like serious issues like this in sports didn't start with this case. I spent most of 2021 reporting on the story of an NHL player named Kyle Beach. And Kyle was sexually assaulted by one of his coaches with the Chicago Blackhawks in 2010. And when he came forward to the team during their playoff run in 2010, the Blackhawks management buried that story, did not go to the police, buried it, and in fact gave Kyle Beach's abuser, a coach named Brad Aldrich, a day with the Stanley Cup, sent him on his way where after he was let go, went and coached high school hockey and sexually assaulted a teenager in Michigan and wound up doing time for that. And there's other allegations around him as well. So coming out of that story of Kyle Beach, and we did a big interview with him that ran for 28 minutes uninterrupted on SportsCenter. And from that day forward, my inbox until today, like today, I've got 3 credible tips that I'm going to have to investigate. Every day, I'm getting tips like that. And I love I hate public speaking, truly, but I love the opportunity to, because the public's trust in journalism has never been lower, I love taking the opportunity to explain how we do our work and how careful we try to be with information. But I also appreciate the chance to give credit to my employer. TSN, it would have been very easy for my bosses to say, let's let somebody else tackle that, because our crown property, one of them, is the World Juniors. And we reported on this story, and the only thing that my boss, Ken Volden, has ever said to me about covering a story like this is be careful, be right, and find the truth. And I just think what a credit to an organization, and hopefully the reporting that we've done has actually helped to enhance the public trust in what we do.
Especially in a world where there is a race to be first. It takes time to be right.
It's a sad reflection of where we are with media. You can't argue it, that there are so many people that are in the business that are chasing more followers on social media and likes for their stories, and that's disappointing. But at the same time, I also sympathize because reporters are under pressure to deliver stories that resonate and get a lot of page views with the public, right? The average story that I'm doing like this is taking months. If I had to guess, I'd say 6 months to report. And that means reporting, traveling, running the risk that somebody's going to change their mind and not want to be public, and we've already gone through a couple trips maybe. Then it has to be edited, so more reporting, and then it has to be vetted by our legal team, so there's more resources on that end. So these stories, to do them right, they take a lot of time, they take a lot of resources, and the truth is that not everybody can afford to do that now.
I want to hone in on hockey culture and at the young age where initiation, or what I refer to as hazing, kind of begins. And I want to make sure that it's only adults in the room when I share this story that I heard of when I was in high school from a friend who played hockey and was leaving the sport and was describing something called teabagging. And it was the first time I had heard of what that even was. And for those in the audience who don't know what that is, it's essentially where you're being initiated, you're a rookie, the senior members of the team ask you to get undressed, you get blindfolded, maybe they tell you to lie down, the tea bag is the scrotum, and they stick it in their faces while they're blindfolded. And there are other stories that get even more explicit than that I won't necessarily share, but I'm sure that you've heard experiences where that is just normalized.
I remember, I was saying earlier, I play hockey a couple times a week. And so it's an amazing game and amazing guys. And we, as great as the game is, the best part of it is sitting in the locker room, sharing our cholesterol numbers with each other, right? and it's amazing. And somebody at this game recently said to me, "You've got to talk to Tom Patterson." Tom Patterson's son, Marcus, played Junior A. He was the second overall pick in the Ontario Hockey League draft. They have 2 drafts, so the second one, which is sort of not as important as the first one, but nevertheless, the number 2 pick. And Marcus's time in junior hockey was fantastic. And I said, I'd love to hear this story. So we met at a Sunset Grill for breakfast in Toronto. And we talked a little bit about the Leafs, and we talked about hockey and the family's love for hockey. And finally, we got down to it. And I asked Marcus, what would you give your hockey experience in junior? Give me a score out of 10 for the off-ice stuff. And he was like, 5. And his dad sort of tilts his head and looks at him. And again, not historical. Marcus Patterson, and the story's in the book, he played in 2019, Junior A. So Marcus talked about how all season his coach sarcastically referred to him as number 2 pick. Hey, it's number 2 overall pick, go pick up the pucks, right? Like just insulting him at every chance that he had that he was not playing in the Ontario Hockey League. He had to perform rookie duties, which meant everything from buying a veteran player dinner at the Keg a half dozen times in the course of the season, to looking after their laundry and making sure it was cleaned and their uniform was pressed. He talked about fines on the team. You hit a goalie in practice, it's $50. You talk back to a veteran, it's money, etc. And then we kind of talked a little bit about, I said, well, at least you didn't have to go through hazing though, right? And he was like, no, we did. So he told me, he said, we had to do the hot box. And so tell me what this means. So they're driving back on their team bus from Buffalo or Niagara Falls to Aurora, Ontario. And somebody taps him on the shoulder and says, back of the bus. So he and the other 5 rookies on the team go to the back and they're told to strip naked. And they're told to all get in the bathroom at the end, back of the bus. So you can imagine on a charter bus, the bathroom is like,
It's a telephone booth.
Yeah,
if it's that big.
telephone booth. So they're all jammed in there. Someone turns the light off. Some coins are thrown through a vent. And they're told, you guys can get out when you give us $3.50, when you find that money. And the joke was there was like 75 cents in quarters or something like that. So he estimated they were in there for about 45 minutes. And I asked him, well, why didn't you say anything at the time? And he said, well, the coach was right there. He was 10 feet away, so he must have known what was going on, and I just figured this was how it goes. And I said, well, why didn't you tell your parents after?
Right.
And he said, well, in what world am I telling my parents? If I tell my mom that story, she's marching into the general manager's office the next day, and my hockey career is over. And it really shone a light for me on the pressure. Like you say, well, why wouldn't players come forward? This is the culture of silence. That's what it means.
Right.
Because they know if they talk, they become a rat in the room. But moreover, it can mean losing their identity, because so many of these, junior hockey players I've talked to, this is who they are. It's all they've ever done. They're hockey players first and everything else later. And if they lose that part of their identity, who are they?
It very much sounds like a fraternity. In full disclosure, I've pledged a fraternity. Can't get into what we do, but secret society.
Why can't we get into what you do?
But that's exactly what it is, right? It's a secret society, and hockey culture almost mirrors that. There are certain practices or rituals to get into the club and be accepted. What we do is less, I guess, homoerotic in nature, but the normalization of hockey culture, it just is what it is, and the code of silence. And how do you break that? It feels like we're getting there with your book.
Maybe in a modest way, sure. These are hard conversations, right? These are uncomfortable truths, and we've been here before. We see every day right now when you do journalism, what people in power respond with. We saw on Air Force One yesterday, a female journalist asked a legitimate question to the United States president, and he responded saying, "Be quiet, piggy." And not one person stood up and said, "Excuse me." In 2001, the Boston Globe newspaper reported landmark reporting on how the church in that city was moving Catholic priests who were accused of sexually assaulting children between parishes, where in many cases those priests were able to reoffend. And when the Globe published this reporting, the response from the church in Boston, a very powerful cardinal, a very high-ranking priest in the church, Cardinal Law, called for the wrath of God to come down on the media. The church threatened the Boston Globe with litigation. There were people even within the newspaper who wondered, shouldn't we be focusing on all the good that the church does instead of focusing on bad stories like this? And I just can't help but see this parallel.
Right.
Like hockey today, can't we just focus on the good? Can't we just talk about how great these guys are and how, they're doing things above and beyond to give back to their community? Sure we can, but this is important. And who's sitting here in this audience or who's sitting across Canada in a hockey rink would not agree that we should make this game safe for everyone, safe for kids, safe for volunteers, safe for coaches, right? I don't understand why we wouldn't all be aspiring to that.
Is the internal conflict less about protecting yourself with the team or protecting the game?
I think it's synonymous. Hockey, it's interesting. Hockey is, of all the sports, and this is my opinion, hockey is a monoculture.
Okay.
This is a sport that, and I grew up watching Hockey Night in Canada, and I remember eyes glued to the set as the players would walk in to the rink, and they all look the same. They've got the same suits, the same beanies, the same full sleeve tattoo. They talk the same. They spit the same. Yeah. Honestly, if you watch a hockey broadcast, you'll see these guys try to curl their tongue and spit the same way, and before you know it, the kids in the minor hockey associations are doing the same thing.
The joke in the newsroom is that hockey wives also resemble each other. Like, honestly.
But you'll see kids in minor hockey rinks, and I've seen it in Toronto in the last couple of years with smelling salts. Where do you think they got this idea from? It's because they watch games on television and they see NHL players with smelling salts. So it is a game that forever has said, don't put yourself above the team. It's about the crest. It's about your team on the front, not the name on the back. Be humble. Do not draw attention to yourself. And that's a hard thing to break.
Yeah. When it comes to people in positions of authority, even the story you shared anecdotally with a coach being close by, we talk about kids playing the game or young adults playing the game, but there are people that know better, that have skin in the game and are expected to lead that aren't doing better. How do we rectify that?
Hold them accountable. Even as we're here tonight, Hockey Canada's policy on adults who are sanctioned for misconduct is to keep those decisions a secret. And that is not best practices.
Right.
Athletics Canada publishes these sanction decisions in full on their website. Gymnastics Canada publishes them. I could run down the list of all the different national sport organizations that do, and even some provincial sport organizations like the Ontario Volleyball Association are transparent about these. And when you ask these organizations, why do you make this public? They say because the right of parents to make informed choices about who they're trusting to coach their kids is more important than the risk of being sued by somebody for publishing that they've had due process and been sanctioned for something. So that's how you do it, by, again, holding Hockey Canada to account, holding the federal government to account, frankly. Right? Hockey Canada, every time I ask them, why aren't you making these sanctions public? They'll say, well, we're waiting for the government to tell us we have to. Honestly. So, okay, so where's the federal government to say you have to do this? Yeah. Like, how many different scandals in sports do we have to go through before someone will have the courage of their convictions and say, okay, this is all going to be out in the open finally?
Yeah. To be fair, I'm going to have to ask, have you noticed any even minute or incremental positive changes with Hockey Canada? When the story came forward, I think the country was horrified to even learn that there was a slush fund. The board tried to clean house a little bit with the board, but we don't actually know if significant changes came from that.
Well, I think there has been real change, and there's been progress for sure.
Okay.
The board of Hockey Canada is gone.
Right.
It's a new board, right? And that slush fund that we talked about, I don't think there's anything wrong with the slush fund. There should be money for people who've been hurt, right? What Hockey Canada did that was so troubling was they kept the existence of this fund a secret. And so while they publicized everything, right, the detail on their annual reports included how many kids are playing hockey in every province and territory and by what age group, but they kept that secret. And why would they keep that secret? The organization kept that secret because they didn't want Canadians to know how many allegations of sexual assault were being made. Because if Canadians knew how many cases were being made, then we would see that there's a systemic issue, and they'd be forced to confront it. But at the same time, there are positives. The Federation, the Hockey Canada now has an independent reporting mechanism for complaints, so that's a positive.
Okay.
Right? They no longer maintain that slush fund. I don't know I think that was a bit knee-jerk, if I'm honest, because again, people who've been hurt, compensation, I don't see why that's a bad thing. But in this book, where I tried to show some light was not at this national level of association. I tried to look at what's happening in grassroots hockey, and I'd love to share for a second a story of positive light.
Please do.
In Hamilton, Ontario, the Minor Hockey Association there is partnering with an organization called Coaching Boys into Men. And so this season, 16 teams, AAA teams and AA teams, so AAA is the highest level of minor hockey competitively, and then AA is the second highest. So 16 teams in Hamilton, their coaches have gone for training to an organization called Interval House, which is a women's shelter in Hamilton. And Interval House has coached the coaches about how to talk to boys about consent. What does it mean? Broad topic. What's affirmative consent? What's ongoing consent? What's healthy masculinity look like? How should we be treating each other? So everything from, what consent is, all the way down to when we're at a tournament and we're traveling, why do we not take our salt and pepper and pizza and paper plates and put them all in a big cup and leave our seating area a disaster for the server to clean up after we're gone? Because hockey coaches across Canada will have their children, their 9-year-old players, wear suits to the game because it shows respect for hockey. But do the actions in the restaurants show respect for people who are serving them? That's one of the quotes in the book from a friend of mine, Allison Forsyth. And anyways, back to what's happening in Hamilton. So these coaches, and I went to some of these presentations or moments during the course of the season when the coaches delivered this programming, and it was amazing. I was watching coaches talk to boys 11 and 12 about consent, and they talked about the Hockey Canada case in London, and you would think that the kids would be distracted and not interested. These kids had so many questions. I couldn't keep up. It was amazing to watch. And some people might say parents should be having these conversations with their kids. And anyone who says that is right. Parents should be having these conversations with their kids. But newsflash, not all parents do. Many parents don't, right? These are hard conversations to have. In my friend group in Toronto, I talked to these dozen men of about my age who've just dropped off their boys to university for the first time, and girls. And I say, well, tell me about your conversation about consent. None of them have talked to their kids about consent. Maybe the conversation should happen in school. It's not happening there either. So imagine kind of a comeback story, a redemption story for a sport. Imagine we get to a point where hockey becomes a leader in Canada at helping these boys become the best versions of themselves as they're growing into young men. Wouldn't that be an amazing thing? Because if hockey does it and it's working, other sports are going to do it too. You're going to have the soccer coach in Hamilton, hopefully very soon. Soccer coaches saying, look at all this great press they're getting in minor hockey now. Why aren't we doing this? And so maybe things will spiral in such a positive way.
What resonated with you the most while you were putting this book together?
How many men wanted to talk about this? And even since I finished writing the book, more players are coming to me. One of the contacts I got today was from a player. I'm working on a documentary with a Quebec company, and in the week after the trial finished in July, we flew to Quebec, and I interviewed more than a half dozen current major junior players about their experiences, and I couldn't believe the things I was hearing. Like this argument that it used to be bad and it's fine now is, there is no better example of putting your head in the sand, because if you actually are really interested in understanding the truth and talking to the young men who are playing this game, you'll hear an uncomfortable story.
Does it feel as though people were waiting for permission to come forward? Like, what was the green light or catalyst for people wanting to share or being willing to share? Because you're saying people are coming forward and they're contacting you. What prevented them beforehand?
This is, we just talked about the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Hockey is our religion.
Fair.
And when you speak out right now, like Stephen Brunt, a friend of mine who wrote the foreword for this book, the way he put it is to critique hockey is to be anti-hockey, and to be anti-hockey is to be anti-Canadian. And who wants to be anti-Canadian, right?
Yeah.
And also, it's hard. Like, this subject is hard to talk about. It's hard to report on. I did a story, so after the original story came out of the allegations in London, I got a tip and did another story about an allegation involving the 2003 Canadian World Junior team. And so that tournament in 2003 was in Halifax. And I spoke to 4 people who had independently reviewed a video that they said showed a sexual assault, had showed several players assaulting a young woman who was not conscious. And so I reported this for TSN. I did a story. I talked about it on SportsCenter that night, and I wrote a story about it for our website. And in the story that I wrote, I said that I talked to 4 people who independently saw this video that showed young men having sex with a woman who was not conscious. Can anybody see a problem with the way I wrote that? I was destroyed. Like, people were so upset with me because clearly you can't have sex with someone who is not conscious. This is sexual assault, period, full stop. But I'm not trained on any of this. I'm trying to figure it out as I go. I'm a reporter. I'm doing my best. But my best on this day was not good enough, and people let me know. And so, I made a point to respond to everybody. I think if I had to guess conservatively, maybe like 300 messages, emails, messaging me on LinkedIn. People got my phone. I don't know how they got my cell phone number, but text messages, everything. And so I made a point to respond to everybody, like saying, I'm very sorry. You're right. This was unacceptable language. Yeah. I'm going to try to do better. I'm going to do better. And like all those people, some of them didn't bother getting back to me after that, but the ones who did were like, oh, I didn't think you were going to respond, and thanks for getting back to me, and this is just really personal because of my own story, and thanks for being considerate and apologizing. Yeah. So that was nice to hear, but that story just points out, like, I think one of the reasons, beyond not having the resources, one of the reasons that maybe some media are nervous about going here is because it's seen to be a subject that's just so full of minefields that you might not even see. I didn't see that one, and it was bad.
I think you're right. Some newsrooms do have a bit of reluctance, and I think it's so fair to describe hockey as Canada's religion. In Brazil, they'll say soccer's our religion. They'll say it emphatically. And not to mix apples and oranges here, but I think even with the Don Cherry story, when that came to light and he was let go for saying you people are not being politically correct, there was a lot of backlash as though we were coming for the Pope. Like, sincerely, people were extremely upset. How dare you touch the untouchable, if you will? That being said, I want to say that I'm not watching the time very closely, but we will come to the audience for questions, so please get your questions ready. But here in the nation's capital, we are getting ready to welcome a host of young people. Bell Capital Cup is happening in December. It's a beautiful camaraderie of hockey and the game from people from around the world. But as families engage in this tournament, what is your advice to parents or volunteers that are involved to look out for or be mindful of?
Don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Don't be afraid to ask, like, why are we doing things this way? And if the answer is because it's always how it's been done, maybe that's not a good enough answer. I did a story last week about a team, a U14 team, and I even felt icky doing a story on U14. I was like, why? But it was important, and I'll tell you why. This was a AA hockey team, and the allegations in this case were absolutely horrible. And the allegations that were corroborated. There was an investigation that Hockey Canada commissioned, and eventually the report summarizing this investigation was published, and I got a copy of the report. So it detailed how the players on this team maintained a Snapchat, which is like a social media group chat app. And on this group chat, and which I saw, there was absolutely vile, homophobic, racist posts. And as bad as what was happening on the group chat, what was happening in the locker room was just as bad. There were players holding down their teammates and pulling down their pants and their underwear and taunting players to simulate sodomy and taking pictures of players' genitals and posting it online on their group chat. And they all did this with several of the teammates standing at the door guarding to make sure that there was no adults coming in. And ultimately, Hockey Canada investigated, and there were some modest sanctions. And like I said earlier, Hockey Canada decided to keep that sanction against the coach who was not in the room, which violated their own policy. Hockey Canada kept that secret. So I guess what I would say to parents is, know what the rules are, and don't be afraid to ask, like, what's happening? So in this case, Hockey Canada's rule, like most sports organizations in Canada now, is that 2 adult coaches have to be in change rooms at all times. Why weren't the coaches there? Where were the adults in the room? And they weren't there in this case.
We're coming to you, Eric, if we can get ready to take questions. But if you were to leave our audience with something in particular or a message, what would it be?
Don't give up on hockey. Honestly, I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah.
And it hurts to do this a little bit. I look at a lot of other hockey media, and if I'm honest, there are days I just think, like, why don't I, like, being a hockey insider, like, maybe I made a mistake, like, not going down that route. But then this has to be done. This reporting has to be done, right? By the time families are coming and saying, you need to hear our story, if media, like, I have to do this. TSN has to do this. Because, and at the same time, I don't want anybody feeling sorry for me. I don't mean to come across like that at all. But we can see the power of journalism still. And that's also a really cool thing to see because the public's trust is so low. I can see how once even we start phoning, when we call somebody and say, hey, we're working on a story on your organization, you can almost feel through the email the nervousness, right? And so that means something, that we can actually make this modest change and help families that have been abandoned, help victims who feel like they have no voice, help hold organizations accountable, and help make people safer playing sports that we all love.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rick Westhead, can we give him a round of applause? We have a question right in the second row here.
Thanks very much, Stefan. Thanks so much, Rick. I'm just trying to figure out, my question is about the London trial. You say we have to respect what the court decided. But as we know from, like, the Jian Ghomeshi trial, that's not always that simple to do. These young men were premeditated or clever enough to get approval from this young woman multiple times as a form of consent. Was there anything about that kind of just smelled weird to you? Like, how did they know to do that? Because that's ultimately what led to the verdict, isn't it?
It played a large role in that, yes. But even what you just said, the public narrative about this story is that EM, in this case, was asking player after player, hey, aren't you going to do this to me? And I see people of a certain age, I'm sorry, I can't use the language, I just can't. But that's the narrative now, that she was asking for this. I sat in that courthouse every day for the trial. I can tell you what the evidence is. The evidence was each of these players, again, they had a group chat that they started several weeks after the incident, when they learned that at least Hockey Canada and perhaps the London police as well were investigating. And one of the players said, well, we'll just tell them that we were in the room getting food. There was no food in the room at that when they all came in. And the girl came in and was asking all of us to have sex, okay? And so each of the players that testified, that's what they said. When EM testified, she was asked about that during her cross-examination, and she'd already testified about being extremely drunk. She'd had, by her evidence, 12 alcoholic drinks. The defense argued, no, that's not true. The drinks you had weren't full shots, and you didn't have as much, so they were contending that she'd only had 8 drinks. I think most people who have 8 drinks, 8 or 12, you're drunk. Anyhow, her evidence on cross-examination, when she said, when the defense lawyer said, well, you said this, she said, that doesn't sound like something I would say. And that is not a flat denial. And, that was one of many areas that were problematic with her testimony, for sure. But she did not say, yeah, I said that. She only was able to say, or she only said, that doesn't sound like something that I would say. And what's interesting is one of the players who was not called to testify, who was interviewed by the London police, and I know this, I've talked with sources in the London police, was asked during his police investigation, what did EM say in that room? And his answer, and another player's answer, who also was not called, was she said nothing. So, again, the Crown didn't call those witnesses, so that is not part of the evidence in this trial. But there were just, for somebody like me who's never covered a sexual assault case before, it was interesting, it was gross. There were so many things that I didn't understand. I still come away not understanding. I don't understand how, again, when these players are talking about what to do, not part of that thread, Brett Howden is a player with the Vegas Golden Knights now. And at one point, a week or so after this incident, he texted a teammate named Taylor Radish. And he said to Taylor, I'm so glad I left the room when I did. Things were getting crazy. Dubé was smacking that girl's ass so hard it looked like it hurt. And the defense argued that text message should not be allowed in as evidence in this case because it wasn't the players giving a formal statement. I don't understand that. I thought that text messages were introduced as evidence in cases all the time. So I don't know why the judge in this case had a problem admitting that. I don't understand why, Michael McLeod, another one of these 5 co-defendants, he was interviewed by the police in late 2018, so roughly half a year after. And the police officer, and this was a voluntary interview in his lawyer's office in Toronto, and the police officer asked him, why do you think these men were coming to your room? Why would all these guys show up, 11 men show up in your room like that? And he said, I don't know, maybe I texted and said I had some food and a girl in my room. The police officer did not then say what I think any first-year journalism student would know to say, which is, can I see the text message that you sent? Right? Mm-hmm. We only came to learn that McLeod actually sent a text message to the team saying, hey, who's up for a 3-way, room 209, Mikey. We only learned about that 4 years later. Yeah. And that text message in itself, I just found so jarring and revealing. Imagine that text message going out to 20 men. Hey, who's up for a 3-way? One of the players responds saying, hey, Robbie, you got my charger? It just felt like so mundane, like just another Monday night. Hey, Robbie, you got my charger? What? Our entire team's being invited back for group sex together. And that was one of the responses. So, there was a lot that I didn't understand, and I still don't understand.
Lucy, thank you for that question. Anyone else? Right there.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for all the work that you do in this area. So I played junior hockey my whole life. I grew up in the 1990s. Around 17, I kind of lost interest. partially due to the culture in the locker room. I grew up with a single mom and kind of grew up knowing that these things that were being said were not okay. And yeah, through my early 20s, I kind of lost interest in the NHL, honestly. And I've recently come back into becoming a hockey fan through the PWHL. And going to the PWHL games is a completely different environment than going to an NHL game. You see young women, young girls, moms and their daughters, people of all genders. It's a very inclusive space, and it's a very happy space. You go to an NHL game, you see drunk men yelling at the refs, very violent, fights in the stands. My question is, how do you think the rise in popularity of the PWHL could potentially change the power dynamic or the balance of power that the NHL has in the game of hockey?
Yeah, what a great question.
Great
Thank you.
question. Yeah.
The PWHL, its very existence, is already changing.
Yeah.
Because if you think back to the summer of 2022, right, this whole thing went off like a firestorm. There was parliamentary hearings here. We learned that the initial investigation of all these players was voluntary. They didn't have to cooperate if they didn't want to. We learned about the slush fund. There was a lot going on. Sponsors backed away. The federal government froze funding to Hockey Canada. And one of those sponsors, Canadian Tire, were like, we're done with you completely. And so Canadian Tire pulled all of their funding and went and is now one of the main sponsors of the PWHL. And so the takeaway from that is Hockey Canada, which runs all the everything from the grassroots programming in Canada all the way up to the national teams, they're on notice, right? These companies are going to now, at least they say, they're going to hold Hockey Canada accountable to doing better on this. And I still think, and this is where my job is kind of never ending this way. My job is still to hold Hockey Canada accountable, not just for the rules of transparency, but who is watching over the major junior hockey leagues in Canada right now? The answer is no one. They are accountable only to themselves. If there's an allegation of misconduct in the Canadian Hockey League, they do the investigation, the results are kept confidential, everyone move on, nothing to see here. And so I think the PWHL, moving forward as the leagues expand, they just expanded, right? Seattle, I think, yeah. I mean, that's amazing. And hopefully that league's success continues and their ratings grow. And not just the PWHL, this isn't just a conversation about hockey. The NSL, Women's Pro Soccer League, just finished their first season and drew more than 1 million viewers for their championship game. The WNBA is coming to Toronto. I've heard rumblings about there's a Women's Pro Volleyball League, and I've heard people looking at Toronto as a possible city. So the pie's only so big. And women's sport, it's long overdue that these leagues exist and flourish. And the better they do, I think the more traditional leagues like the NHL and the Canadian Hockey League are really going to be under the gun to do the right thing. Otherwise, they're going to lose sponsor support. They're going to have to. Great question. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. We had a question on this side still. And raise your hand if you do have a question. We'll come to you eventually.
Good evening, Mr. Westhead. Thank you for being here.
Hi.
The previous gentleman stole my thunder. I was going to talk about the PWHL as well, so I'm going to Plan B.
Okay.
When through the London trials,
Yeah.
At some point, Sport Canada rescinded their funding to Hockey Canada, which has, I believe, been reinstated. But in your opinion, did that have any effect on anything? Did that cause other sponsors to look at it as well, or was it just negligent?
I don't know about that. I think that the federal funding, Hockey Canada is one of the most powerful organizations in the country, sports or non-sports. And so, I think pulling federal funding in this case was maybe a little bit more symbolic, right? It wasn't like they weren't going to meet payroll because they didn't have government funding. But it was still important because the message it sent to other national sport organizations was a serious one, right? isn't just a hockey story. The government wanted to avoid embarrassment because once we learned about what was happening in Hockey Canada, reporters at the Globe and Mail, The Athletic, Toronto Star, like everybody, right? We were all in on this. What's happening in other sports, right? We've seen, and again, one of the things you'll hear from people sometimes is, well, this isn't a hockey problem, it's a societal problem. And there's truth in that for sure. It is. But you know what? When there's stories about Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein or Larry Nassar or Jerry Sandusky, there's journalism. There's reporting on it. And so why would we not want there to be reporting and journalism on something that is so important within our country?
Wonderful. Right here as well.
Hi, Rick,
Hey.
and thanks.
Yeah.
I know off the top you said this wasn't so much about the NHL, it's about the kind of like grassroots stuff, minor hockey, and I think that's really important and a really obvious place to focus. I guess my question is, do you think stuff like the consent coaching you talked about in Hamilton, which sounds really cool, is enough when those kids go home and see powerful men at the pinnacle of the sport coaching, playing, being general managers on their TV like that same night? Like, can we do it just from the bottom up?
No, well, I mean, let's be honest. Look at what our kids are watching right now, and look where they're getting their information. Look, like, who are they being influenced by? I mean, we're not here to talk about pornography, but look at how accessible pornography is now for anyone, right? I remember dropping my son Carter off at a sleepover when he was 7 and picking him up the next day, and the mom of the boy whose house he stayed with said, "Oh, I just got to talk to you for a minute." I was like, "Okay, what?" "Yeah, one of the boys had my iPad and they Googled something they shouldn't have Googled." And I was like, "Well, what are you talking about? What was it?" "Oh, I deleted the history. I'm not sure exactly." My point is, it's not like there's a lot going on right now, and kids are getting unfiltered information, right, from all kinds of different places. I talked to one of the, the Coaching Boys into Men is one program. Another area that I spotlighted is how there are some junior hockey teams that are trying to be better. Consent training in most junior hockey cities, I'm just looking, nobody here fits the look, but what it looks like usually is somebody at the front of an office, at the front of the, like here, right? And like imagine like 20 guys in sort of a horseshoe around, and they're sitting as far back as they can, and they've got the hoodies up, and they've got earbuds in, and it's like, oh God, we're here for consent training. And it's an hour every year, so every September, and they'll show this video that's like a cartoon of tea. You can choose to have a cup of tea, but then you can change your mind and not have the cup of tea. And honestly, that is, I'm not joking, that is how some teams in junior hockey today do consent training. In Peterborough, the way the Peterborough Petes have done it is different. So they brought in somebody named Luke Ben Veltson. He's Australian, and I'm just standing up so I can actually see you. And so he's Australian, former rugby player. The guy can't skate, and basically the Petes said to him, "This is a priority for us. We want all of our players to have access to you." And so they gave him unfettered access. And that means he's there after practices. He's just there when the guys arrive after school for the ones who are still in high school, right? And so what does that do? Why is that important? In the same way that when I go into somebody's life, come into somebody's life and I say, "Please trust me to be vulnerable with me and tell me what's really going on with you." Is that a conversation I can have in an hour every year? So by him being there all the time, and I've talked to some of the players on the Petes, it's made a difference. And so again, like maybe in a best case scenario, other Canadian Hockey League teams and Junior A teams and B and C teams will see that and be like, that actually looks pretty good, right? Because ultimately, it's sort of like healthcare. We can either spend the money doing preventative or we can spend the money later after people get sick. And so for a junior team or an NHL team, why not make the investment now to try to prevent it from happening and raise men that you're proud to call alumnus and who are the best versions of themselves, instead of having to go into damage control like Hockey Canada did in 2022, hiring Navigator as a crisis communications firm.
I saw a question, hand right here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Rick.
Hi.
Speaking of unfiltered information, the messages in the group chat, the text messages, the Snapchat messages are all now a matter of the public record. How and why do you think the narrative has gotten so twisted around the trial despite that?
I think people see what they want to see in some cases. I mean, that trial was long. It was 2 months, right? And then there was also the pre-trial that occurred before. I don't know. I think it's maybe a reflection of how people get news today as well. There's somebody that was at the trial who was putting stuff on TikTok every day. And so maybe that's informing how people see what's happening there. I can tell you, like, for me, all of my stories were lawyered every day, right? And I've heard people say, those 5 boys, like, there was actually one man who came to the trial one day, and when I came out of the courtroom with Katie Strang, a friend who's a great reporter from The Athletic, this man was in the hallway, bigger guy, 6'2", 6'3", and he started screaming at me, "This is all your fault. You're ruining their lives." And he left, and it caused enough of a stir that the judge, after lunch, came back and was like, what happened in the hallway? Like, I heard that in my chambers. What's going on? But when I went out for lunch, the guy ran up at me from across the street, and he was wearing a T-shirt, a blue T-shirt that had my picture on it, and it said, "Rick Westhead is a piece of shit." And all he could say was, "You're going to get what's coming to you," again and again. And I don't know where he got his information from. I tried to explain the role that the media plays. I tried to explain that all of my stories are edited. They're all lawyered, right? So that when the players are making their allegations in court, we're covering that as well. And he just was determined to tell me that I was going to get what was coming to me. So I don't know how people get their news. I just know that, like, at TSN, we're very careful about how we put stories out like that.
We're only going to take 2 more. I did see a hand in the back, right there.
Hi. I'm actually a first-year Master's of Journalism student at Carleton, so this is a journalism question. You talked a bit about how you didn't have training to report on sexual assault as a sports reporter. It's something I'm really interested in. I think now in our current cultural landscape, a lot of sports reporters are going to have to know how to report on these kind of things, just like celebrity reporters, business reporters, post-Me Too era. How did you get that training, or did you just have to take it upon yourself? Do you think that newsrooms are starting to implement that training?
One of the best things about being a journalist is you can ask people almost any question. And it is honestly, like, you will never, unless things work out extraordinarily well for you, you will not get rich doing this job. But the gift that journalists receive in people's trust, people who are, having the best day of their life, having the worst day of their life. I started out, one of the first, like, kind of internship things I did was with the Burlington Spectator in my hometown. And they said, "You're going to go do pickups." You know what that means? So a pickup back in the day was when a child dies, is hit by a car or something like that, and there's a tragic death, and they don't have a picture, and you have to go to the family house and ask for a photo for the newspaper. So training, what kind of training can you get to prepare you for that, right? You said, well, sports writers, celebrity writers, business writers. I don't even think of myself as a sports reporter. I'm a journalist. I've been blessed. I was a foreign correspondent before I came to TSN. I covered India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan. I've covered death. I've covered, beautiful stories of resilience, seen the world, and it's been a huge gift. So I think my advice to you is, when you're trying to figure out this training, meet people. Don't do it on Zoom. Don't do it on email. Meet people where they are in person. So you're in Ottawa, your school here, go and talk to Crown attorneys, go and talk to defense lawyers, go and talk to support centers for people who are fighting gender-based violence, if you're interested in this. And it's interesting, when you go into a setting like that and you say, I want to understand, people want to help you, right? And so go and you know what, the other thing that you're going to find as a journalist, once you build up these relationships, because that is all this job is relationships. That's it, right? I don't know how long I've been a journalist, a long time. I've never done a story, ever, off of a press release. I get them every day. They're just like, lining up in my email box, and I don't even look at them. But you will find so many stories that are unique and compelling and in the public interest if you just meet people and ask them about what they do and what are they struggling with, and you'll find stories.
I did see the gentleman beside Ian next, and that'll be our final question.
Thank you. So my question just goes back to hockey culture. You mentioned that hockey is Canada's sport. It is like a religion. So I am curious, talking about more minor league sports, why don't we see this kind of toxicity and culture in other minor league sports? Or maybe we do.
Well, we know that we do, right? In this book, I write about issues in football in America that have been documented well, about soccer in England. We've had Bob Berarda, a former national team coach who was predatory with young women on the West Coast in Canada. It does happen in other sports. Mm-hmm. I think there is something unique about hockey. What other sport do players who are 14 and 15 move away from their family homes and start playing on teams with men who are 20? In what other system does that happen? And the players that I interviewed, the dozens of players, the common thread, the through line through all these stories is love hockey, but the off ice, man, you go into that new market and the 20-year-old, and there's many cases where players have said to me, thank God I had good vets on my team, but there are just as many stories where they're like, I was so afraid, because if I didn't do everything I could to be accepted and embraced by that group of veterans, my life, it wasn't worth living. And another part about hockey that's interesting, a lot of listen to the popular hockey podcasts right now. I first learned what a kill list is, and a kill list, for people who don't know, is how the vernacular for how many women you've slept with. I first learned about that on a popular hockey podcast. Guys who are now in their early 40s who are talking like they're 19 still. There's a brand of hockey merchandise called Hockey Benders. It's very popular. Their posts get millions of views. And one of the shirts that they sell, which is popular, and I've seen it again and again, I got pictures of kids that I wouldn't publish because they're kids, but I see this in Toronto rinks all the time. And one of their popular shirts, hoodies and shirts, it says, "Rippin' Wristers, Wheelin' Sisters." And so, a reference to taking wrist shots and hooking up with girls. And their parents are buying them for these kids. And I only mention that because, I've never seen a shirt anything close to like that in baseball or basketball or football or any other sport. I don't know what it is about hockey. It does seem like there's something unique.
Certainly. I know you're sticking around, going to sign some books and sell some books. And before I do let you go, I just want to do a check-in, because I know this work is difficult. And for those who are journalism students here, it's not necessarily like being a first responder per se and having that level of PTSD, but once you have a compassionate heart and you're telling these stories and you're receiving the backlash from the public and you're consuming all of this content, especially in a court case or a trial such as this, it can weigh on you. And so I just want to make sure you're doing well, Rick.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I've got a healthy family, and there is so much beauty in the world. I live near High Park in Toronto. I rip around there with my dog, and
Good.
I play hockey, and I'm horrible at it. And anyway, but I've got a lot to focus on, and it's not only you talk about the blowback. Yeah. People that
Their
reach out to me,
gratitude as well.
I get, believe me, I get more than my fair share of people reaching out to say thanks for doing this work. And that's meaningful too. It does help to balance off the like, I hope your kid gets cancer again messages, which I get too often, unfortunately. But, I mean, the other part of this is social media. Like, why do we care?
Exactly.
Somebody's going to create an account and not have the courage to use their own identity or their own name on an account. Why would I spend 2 seconds caring about what somebody is writing from an account like that?
Yeah. Amen to that. Thank you.
Thank you. One more thing? Can I say one more thing? Yeah? Just one more thing, if I can. So my proceeds from this book are going to Ontario women's shelters like the London Abused Women's Centre, the Toronto Rape Crisis Centre. So if you haven't done, and I'm up against a lot of really good books, it's like Margaret Atwood comes out with a book the same week I do. Amazing. So I don't mind pushing, if you don't mind, like you'll be helping organizations that are out there doing good work. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's all the more reason, ladies and gentlemen, to buy at least a couple of copies. Christmas is coming. This is essential reading for all of us who love sports and want to do something about the systemic challenges that run very deep in our national religion and our national sport. So thank you, Rick. Thank you, Stefan, for navigating this very dark and difficult conversation, but I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. Just a couple of things. Rick will be signing books at the book signing table. 3 events coming up that I want to let you know about. On Tuesday, November 25th, we've got The Smiling Land with Alan Doyle, not to be missed. And we have Against the Grain with Terry O'Reilly at November 27th. Also, our friends at LAC are doing a book launch on December 4th, and this is not to be missed for all of us hockey lovers. It's a book by Donald Murray, and it's a story about Howie Morantz, hockey's first real living legend. Thank you all very much for your attention tonight. Safe home, and we'll see you again soon.